Benjy, what's up?
Hey, Dave, how's it going? How's Iowa going over there?
It's great. I have been in Iowa since not 6 years ago. Shorter than that, most of last week, and it feels very long. I've driven lots of miles, although I can't talk too much about that because I was trying to make fun of cliches reporters use earlier today and realized I cut off a bunch of my escape.
Really, but how was the fried food? Tell me.
Fried. There's lots of fried. It turns out that you know Iowa has food in it and pork products and things like that, and cornfields. But you are in New Hampshire, which has its own cliches. You just got there?
Yeah, and in fact, I haven't been able to go to any events yet. Only Huntsman is here right now. But I did manage to eat a gigantic thing of hamburger mac and cheese, so I'm well on the way to knocking off all the cliches.
It's pretty good. I think, according to Michelle Bachmann's speech, that's what George Washington ate when he was retreating from the British after the Battle of the Alamo. I don't know. Pretty sure that's what Bachmann said. Anyway, no. So I just got back from a Rick Santorum event. You can't see me, but I'm wearing a sweater vest, which is mandatory upon going to any Rick Santorum event. It was my fourth or fifth, and he was closing out the campaign basically on pretty friendly turf, not with a ton of voters. He was closing out at this Christian school in the Iowa suburbs, very large Christian school. I would guess there might have been 50, 60 people there who were eligible caucus goers. And I talked to a couple who were going to go to the caucus tonight. But, basically, the mood in Iowa right now, especially if you can tell, a way to tell this is the big TV reporters who they're spending their time on. It's basically between Santorum and Romney, and then people are starting to ease up on Ron Paul.
Right, and I tell you, I was just watching from the TV coverage today, so less on the ground. There seemed to be a lot of focus on Newt Gingrich's collapse mostly, especially the stuff about him calling Romney a liar. I saw that every 5 minutes there was someone talking about it. It just seemed like people are really fixing in on that.
And I've been in this weird position where I actually think it's totally fair for Gingrich to point out that Romney is lying about him. He's actually one of the people, this rally I just went to at this Christian school, David Bossie was there, who is the president of Citizens United and is friends with Gingrich and has done several movies with Gingrich. So it's kind of his fault that these super PAC laws exist. And I asked him for kind of a take on how Gingrich was handling it, whether it was fair. He was like, look, Newt should have... He was very gentle, but I think he basically said, I am not of the belief that somebody can attack... If somebody attacks you, you can go quiet and not respond immediately. So Gingrich did bumble, but everyone's being really cold-hearted and cynical and just saying, hey, it's your own fault, wimp, for not attacking the guy faster.
Yeah, I saw he had to rebut all these questions. Why didn't you run counter ads? Well, he has no money, but in addition, he was kind of boxed in with his positive campaign, and it also was, he was getting outspent 35-1. What difference would it make?
It wouldn't have made any. Although 4 years ago, Mike Huckabee got beaten up the same way by Romney, and it didn't hurt him as much. I have theories as to why, but I guess we should probably start talking about Rick Santorum because I'm going to have the sweater vest, and it's just on my mind. He is, again, there are these very tangible things you can see when you're here. He is the person the media is focusing on. Basically, everyone has done their own analysis, which may or may not include of reading Nate Silver and passing it off as your own homework, and figured out that Bachmann is collapsing. Perry's kind of holding okay. Gingrich is actually kind of holding okay. But there are enough undecided voters up there who usually go for the conservative candidate that Santorum is probably picking them all up. It's a rare situation. I think maybe there's one poll he's in the lead. There might not be. I think it's only Paul and Romney in the lead. But if you look at those internals, he is the most liked candidate. He's the one who's been moving up the most steadily in the last few days. He doesn't have a great organization like Huckabee had last time. And he's barely been on the air. His ads are very generic, and I haven't seen very many of them. So he might, I think the media kind of wants this story where the guy runs an extremely kind of Jimmy Carter 1976 low-rent campaign and shocks everyone because they did the usual mistake where they beat each other up. Although it's not quite that. He happened to be the last guy standing after everyone else failed to be the anti-Romney.
Right. It's funny you mentioned that theory. That's really the two competing theories are one that Santorum did something right and the other that look, we've gone through literally everyone else in Iowa. He is the only one left. There's no one else to have a surge. It's just like he ran out of options.
Well, watching him at this rally, I was reminded that he is a good politician. Limited, he's good. He's better than we give him credit for. And I mean, the media doesn't really engage in self-analysis after an election. I mean, apart from 2000, when people agreed not to call states that fast anymore on a presidential election, there's not a lot of analysis of. But this year, if Santorum ends up being the last guy standing against Romney, it'll be a little bit fluky because it's just the party is uniquely awkward feeling about its frontrunner. It'll also be the turnout voters did not actually care that much that the guy lost an election in 2006. I mean, the reason the media didn't take him seriously, and I'm not trying to be passive, I didn't take him that seriously, is because he ended his career in politics by running a uphill election, blowing it massively, losing by 18 points, and becoming just kind of a notoriously angry and ineffective social conservative politician. But I don't know why it was so obvious. We assumed that voters would take all that into consideration and roll him out. I mean, they did for a while. They didn't take him very seriously for a while. They wanted somebody else, but they weren't that concerned with the fact the guy lost an election. And he says these things which seem ridiculous, like, well, Lincoln lost an election, only served a couple terms in Congress, and then came back, and it worked for him. It is
the old Lincoln dodge. But it's funny that you mentioned. I feel like it was even more reasons than that. I mean, that's the starting point that he got blown out. But then, if you looked at this election going in, you'd probably think, well, what's going on right now? Well, everything's about the economy, supposedly. Everyone's going to run against Obama on the economy, on jobs. Who are they going to nominate? The guy who is only known for being pro-life and anti-gay and the most of both. Anti-contraception. I mean, everything. Yeah. So it seems weird. It's this total 2004 throwback, even more so than George W. Bush himself. It seems so weird that would be the man of the moment. I think that also made a lot of people question whether or not he was worth paying that much attention to.
Yeah, well, but in retrospect, it seems pretty clear that in Iowa he was always going to do at least pretty well because there is a clutch of Iowans who care first and foremost about that stuff, and they still do. And when you see polls that show voters don't care as much as they used to about this, the guys who really do are uncharacteristically overrepresented in the 130,000 or whatever number of voters who will show up at a caucus, right? So he was always going to do pretty well. I've noticed, though, as he's done better, I've watched. You don't get to read that much because you're driving everywhere. Or if you do read, it's dangerous. And so I've been reading, obviously, other people's articles. Excuse me. Nothing bad's happened. I just got dehydrated all of a sudden.
What's going on over there?
It's the hotel. Well, because the weather's been bouncing back and forth. This is another thing I put in the Twitter cliches. Things have gotten a little bit prickly here. But people have been writing articles about how he has blue collar appeal, and he's kind of winning off of that. I think there's a political lead on this, thus everyone started to pay attention to it. And I've spent a lot of time listening to him, and this does come up, but it really isn't. He won some elections in Pennsylvania with this, just like Mitt Romney won an election in Massachusetts by being a moderate pro-gay Republican. But it's there's it's this muscle that he doesn't use that much. He does have a nice blue-collar background. I think it was Huffington Post had a great montage of people proving that they were blue-collar.
Yeah, it was terrific.
Various hardships.
Right, he has coal miner grandparents and stuff, right? I mean, he's really true roots there.
But he took this question about at this rally at the school about basically the economy, and he ended up. It's whenever he gets the plane to fly the plane, he usually pilots it into the social conservative turf. I mean, the jobs answer, he had a little bit of blue collar stuff in there, and it ended with the fact that we've lost all of our values, and we have religious values, and the left has selfish values, and until we figure that out, we're never going to figure out anything. I mean, this is this was always the way he was going to approach people. And again, in Iowa, it makes some sense. But yeah, you're right. He didn't. The media was not completely missing things by thinking this wasn't the right message for this year.
Right. Also, I think this gets into something you mentioned, a question of how much Iowa actually matters here. Because I think people took that message out of 2008 too, when they went for this social conservative Huckabee who didn't necessarily have the greatest chops in the economy or the clearest message there, but he still managed to have this extremely strong showing, even with very little cash, mostly because of his appeal to evangelicals, to the religious right. So I think going into this, Santorum's always going to suffer from that feeling that even if he does very well in Iowa today, there's a sense that, well, maybe Iowa just isn't that relevant to the process because they're always going to go for this disproportionately social conservative message that really doesn't seem to fit where the rest of the party is right now around the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you're going to find out what it's like in New Hampshire. But there are other states where Republican voters feel these things. All you can do in a primary state is get a bunch of anecdotes and personal stories about how they interpret this stuff. They do feel, they do feel like the Santorum message is essential, and the eventual candidate should have some of it. And Romney, who's barely been examined this whole time, I mean, you definitely noticed a whiff of that in the last 24 hours. Is reporters kind of like waking up before the exam at 10 a.m., waking up at 9 and realizing they didn't plan for it. Like no one has run a negative ad against Romney. So Romney's had this kind of unencumbered message that fits all this stuff in here. I mean, it's patriotism, it's economic growth, it's the strength of the family. It's pointing out that a lot of it we kind of interpreted probably correctly as him subtly reminding voters that Gingrich was divorced, or that his family had his kids were all very successful, and
just so we're clear, we're talking about what we mean subtly. We mean that his wife was in every ad in Iowa. The ending of every Romney ad was him frolicking with his wife through a field. So just so we're clear what subtle means regarding Newt's marriage.
Right. I mean, he was bracketed for a while against Kane, who collapsed on that, and Gingrich collapsed on that. But he was also kind of quietly competing with somebody like a Santorum, who was going to point out that he had a ton of kids. I mean, although Santorum beats him by 2 on the number of kids. But yeah,
it's a very tough competition in this field.
But I do feel like you can't overrate this, and this is the reason going to change after Iowa. That's probably the next thing we should discuss is what actually happens in various victory situations. But the sense I got was that the Tea Party, people have changed their idea of what the Tea Party means. First of all, there's less Tea Party activism than there was 4 years ago, or 2 years ago. And second, just Michelle Bachmann as the kind of quasi-official Tea Party candidate, as she labeled herself and as the media labeled herself. Mm-hmm. I just felt from talking to people about her and seeing her events that people were kind of sick after a year of the economy still being bad of hyper-combativeness in politics. They like combativeness in culture, in the culture, and they like combating Barack Obama personally. But Santorum, by being somebody who was out and had a record no one really knew about, Romney from not even barely talking about politics, people got even with Santorum, people get the sense that he can work across party lines. But he talks a lot about it. I mean, he loves to mention the Democrats he's worked along with. Like he'll mention it. This is a thing he kept getting made fun of in debates. He'll mention Senate procedure. At this thing today, he was talking a lot about cloture. He'll mention that he's co-sponsoring thing with Barbara Boxer. But voters are warmer to him than Bachmann, who will just relentlessly talk about how she has repeal bills ready to go, or Perry, who will talk about how he's going to, these kind of gimmicky things about making Congress work half the year and do it all wearing like Harrison Bergeron headgear and weights and stuff.
But it's funny you mentioned that about Santorum. I think you're picking up on something that was present in Newt Gingrich too. I was just watching several of his town halls the last couple of days. He has really played up the bipartisan Newt lately. I was actually surprised. Even while his biggest liability, apparently, is that he's getting hammered over Nancy Pelosi ads, over support for the healthcare mandate, that hasn't taken him off his message, which is that, look, I did all this work with Bill Clinton. Obama doesn't know how to work with the other side, but I will. I found that very surprising that seemed to resonate for a while.
Yeah, it does. It just, I think voters got tired of it, and I saw, one moment I saw from Bachmann here was that she was asked a kind of a real weird event that was never going to go well for her, just a town hall with this insurance company, asked 2 questions about how to work across party lines, and her answer was just, I'll elect 13 senators so everything I want will get done. Whereas Santorum will bring up Barbara Boxer, and Gingrich will, I don't think he's ever mentioned the fact that he impeached Bill Clinton, or the Congress he led, even after he was gone, impeached Bill Clinton, and he was one of the people who wanted to do it. It's just, I think, the people have a different view of what they want from politics that's not quite as angry. But, I mean, I've been saying all this, and I think you and I are on the same page that the Iowa caucuses, both as a matter of delegate selection, as a matter of who the nominee is, won't actually matter.
Unless something really weird happens with one of the candidates who actually has the resources to carry this fight against Romney for a while. I think you need something like Rick Perry completely out of nowhere finishing number 2 or something, or to really have an impact, or even maybe Newt somehow magically winning in first, but that seems increasingly tough to imagine. But yeah, I'm wondering if you think there's any scenarios coming out of Iowa that might slow Romney's momentum, at least even turn this into a bit of a longer race. As you mentioned, the press has been kind of pining for a longer race to some degree, but it seems like everyone's starting to come to grips with this notion that maybe Romney just has this thing in checkmate already.
I think somebody beating Romney by a substantial margin would do it, because the polls aren't showing that. If you look at 4 years ago, it was, I remember thinking Romney would win because of his money and organization. That he didn't, but Huckabee basically outperformed the final polls by like 2 points, not by that much. I think if Romney got fewer votes than he got last time and lost to Santorum by like 6-7 points, then I think people we would go back to a round of why the Republicans hate him so much, and I think sit back and wait for polls showing him losing, or not even him losing ground, but whether people are taking to Santorum in the other states, because there's not a great example of something like this. He would basically have no money and no support, and you'd be basically forced to become the new standard bearer of conservatives against him. Romney would respond by just trying to destroy him. Step 1 will be crushing him in New Hampshire by 40 points. So I'm already falling into this. Like, if you game this out more than 3 days, then you start to see how Romney wins again. Even
as it is, as far as I'm concerned, I think it's quite possible that the Iowa caucus was on January 7th instead of January 3rd. The Santorum search might already be over. It was so last minute that they didn't even have time really to get up ads against him. No one's had any chance to dump Oppo on him. They're scrambling trying to do it, but it's
the one thing you're seeing really is robocalls that no one will take credit for is the one thing.
Right, and there's ads from Rick Perry, who's really not a very popular messenger for this kind of stuff at the moment.
Yeah.
It's just, there hasn't been time to really go after him, and he still hasn't faced a single debate where he's been anything but an also-ran. So there's going to be a New Hampshire debate. There's going to be future debates if this race keeps going. Santorum's going to have a tough time keeping up with everyone out to get him, whoever's left. So it'd be interesting to see how he weathers all this. Because so far, one by one, every candidate who's been in Santorum's position has gotten destroyed pretty quickly when all this stuff starts to happen. And it's only accelerated now that people are on the air.
It has, and so Perry is demoing arguments that might take down Santorum. He's got a radio ad that I heard here where a woman is on a game show and keeps getting quizzes, things like, which senator put this many earmarks into pork barrel legislation? Rick Santorum, that kind of thing. Like, typical goofy, completely ineffective Rick Perry attacks, but kind of pointing out that the reason in the age of the Tea Party we didn't think he'd be taken seriously is because in the Senate he was basically a right-wing, a culturally right-wing Marlon Spector. I mean, he had no problem with government, shoveling money and basically building infrastructure, using its proper functions, building, people with more power, bringing more money to their districts. He had no problem with the way that worked, and the Tea Party did. And that isn't something that Romney is just unassailable on because he was only a governor for 4 years. Now, it hasn't worked at all here. And I think, Romney's response might be to try to completely obliterate him in New Hampshire. And, because the union leader endorsed Newt, who knows if they would actually go after Santorum on that account too, or if they would play the long game and realize that anything that helps Romney will just give him the nomination. But you see ways they could attack him. They're not as visceral. The blue collar thing I was talking about. I mean, if it becomes a contest of who culturally Republicans feel more comfortable with, the rich guy or the grandson of Italian immigrants and coal miners and stuff, then maybe that starts to be useful in South Carolina. But Republicans historically haven't cared that much about that. I mean, George Bush beat Bob Dole. The other George Bush beat John McCain. Romney's.
And Romney's got a plausible case that he's basically on the same page anyway, no matter how he looped the loops he took to get there. He's pretty much right on the social issues. He signed whatever pledges they wanted. It's a little harder to make the argument against him that I think Santorum would like to. But I think one of the issues here with Santorum is that I think that you mentioned he had the misfortune of being associated with this period that is pretty much in Tea Party mythology, where everything went wrong for the GOP. Oh, they started spending and they passed Medicare Part D, and there's terrible things. A lot of people are skeptical of the wars even. Santorum is the face of all that. I mean, he was really front and center as exactly who you associate with pretty much every one of those policies that now have been sort of retconned into these disastrous moves that weren't the true Republican Party. And I feel like people don't have a lot of information about that yet. That's the big thing. I don't think people know that much about Santorum's record yet.
They don't. We don't know. There's a lot of levels this plays out on. I mean, I think if you wanted to design a candidate who could win in Florida, having him be the most. I mean, he was basically the guy who ran out with the bayonet first on Social Security privatization, and he'll take credit for that on the trail as a way to win over Tea Party people. But when you get to Florida, if you looked at Perry's collapse in the polls and whether people thought it was a Ponzi scheme, Social Security, I mean. There's weakness there, and Romney has shown, and his super PAC has shown this real willingness to just say completely anything, any message whatsoever, no matter how incoherent it is, and be pretty effective at bringing the guy down with it. That's a thing I'm trying to figure out. In Iowa's, we used to have before McCain-Feingold, we had lots of anonymous ads. We still have anonymous ads during McCain-Feingold, but with the super PAC, you basically got people who work in the Romney circle making Romney's negative arguments with no clear evidence, at least if you're just a voter watching TV, that he's behind it. And he's been pretty, I mean, I think he can run this play a few more times where he doesn't say anything negative, but he takes apart somebody who, with these ads, and they get flustered. I mean,
it's such an obvious strategy, but it's been so deadly effective, and there's no reason it can't just continue right on through the primaries into the general election. This is the future. It looks like. I mean, I think you'll agree that even though there were ways to run issue ads through 527s in a similar fashion, there's something different about what's happened now that you can have a super PAC specifically attached to a candidate making such a direct argument. Bear in mind, some of the most famous 527 ads, especially the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, they weren't blanketed all over the airwaves. They just got a lot of media attention. Whereas here, Romney's super PAC is pretty much outspending everyone, right? I think they're the single biggest spender in Iowa. Period. Am I wrong here? But certainly top three.
4.3 million, which is more than.
That's probably more than Santorum's entire Iowa operation. Period. Times several.
It definitely is. I don't think he raised that much this quarter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we haven't found out yet, but. I doubt that he did. And the Santorum ads you see are just you hear a decent amount of radio and you see some TV, but nothing. I mean, when Huckabee came in here, he was kind of surging in the final quarter the whole time, and it was much clearer that he had the operation ready to go in the state, whereas Santorum's so fluky. But can you envision circling back in an Iowa caucus result that will dramatically change the race so that Romney might lose it?
Something that would happen in Iowa that would change the race so Romney would lose it, you said?
Yeah.
If I think there's anything left. What is hard to quite here? I think there's always the chance that maybe Newt does get some traction. He's getting a lot of attention for this argument. I don't mean in his own poll numbers necessarily, but he's starting to get a lot of attention for this argument that Romney is just buying Iowa in the most disgusting way possible. That, like, look, when you see these negative ads, I want you to think that's Mitt Romney. He's starting to really, like, make the case on the process. If that sinks in, I wonder if there might be a little bit of a backlash. I think this is the kind of thing that could actually follow Romney eventually, since it's very tough to put that much distance between him and these super PACs, just like it's tough to put that much distance between Rick Perry and his associated super PACs. And I think there's going to be an issue that gains some steam as the election goes on, especially because people already have this preconceived notion of Romney as this ultra-rich guy who already did try to buy the nomination. So it sort of fits into the narrative. So I wonder if maybe that gets a hold a little, but I think there's plenty of opportunity for the anti-Romney vote to quickly consolidate around whoever's surging, just out of desperation. To leap on Santorum, even if they don't know much about him, to go for other protest votes, maybe, I don't know, Ron Paul even. But in general, I think even a top 3 or 4 finish for Romney probably keeps him pretty much in a glide path to the nomination. Unless there's something really surprising in the next few days that changes the dynamic, I think the expectation going in is still going to be, well, New Hampshire is really his state, South Carolina isn't really his state, and then Florida and Super Tuesday will be the sort of deciding dates. And there he just has so many more resources.
Well, let's remember 2008. Let's be really cynical. So, Hillary Clinton is the national frontrunner. Now, I'll get to something that's different in a second, but she competes in Iowa, doesn't compete at the same level that Edwards or Obama do. Spends money there, but isn't there as many days. Doesn't go negative against them. That's the difference, I think. And then she comes in narrowly third. I mean, but not by a ton. She loses to Edwards. If she'd come in second, one thing. But there is such a desire to bring her down after she falters that she almost loses New Hampshire. There is a kind of historic surge for her, and Romney's lead over anyone else is bigger than hers was over Obama.
Right.
But if he comes in third or something like that, then how much do we pile on him? And what I just was saying in the middle of that is, like, the Democrats had this weird race in 2008 where they didn't really go negative each other until late in it. And it's frankly because who wanted to go negative against the first legitimate black candidate and the first legitimate female candidate who was a beloved first lady? There was just no
Hillary was such a clear front runner till almost the last minute that for her it would be punching down, and you didn't want to go too hard against her because you're probably going to end up in her administration. It was a different dynamic than this one where it's been much more divided.
It is, and Romney is just much more comfortable taking this guy apart. I mean, I've said he did a veil was probably, I think it was his last big avail before the caucuses on New Year's Day, and got a question, just a contrast question about him and Santorum, and very gently just kind of started to make he is a professional politician who's not very electable thing, and just subtly hinting that he knows exactly what to do if the guy becomes problematic. Whereas Hillary in New Hampshire, it was in New Hampshire, Nevada. I mean, it started to get kind of like there were some ugly process questions about whether Obama people were playing fair, and we can't possibly get into the argument over whether Michigan and Florida should have their delegates and stuff, but there was no negative air war really against the guy, and this time Romney will do that. The Super PAC will do that. Not even just air. I mean, there will be pieces of mail attacking Rick Santorum. So I just feel it's hard to game it out. Like it's hard to imagine him collapsing and not knowing what to do because he came in second or third here. Because the mistake will be that he decided to play for it after all. and came up short. But if he comes up short in second place, having dispatched everybody else, or if he comes up short to Ron Paul, then it won't matter. This is just so Lewis Carroll, the way to analyze this stuff.
I know, it's so weird talking about it. It just feels like all roads lead the same way. But the other thing with Romney that I'll give him credit for compared to the 2008 situation is that there's no mystery right now how he handles things when he's challenged in the polls by some upstart. He's done this like 5 times this primary. He's been very calm. To his credit, he's been very, very calm and focused. When one of these people rises up, he doesn't get panicked. He's just carefully and methodically destroyed them using whatever weapon is appropriate. In Rick Perry, it was went after him hard in the debates on exactly the right topics, and really just took the bloom off the rose before Rick Perry kind of did the rest on his own. With Herman Cain, he just basically sat back and watched. I mean, that wasn't too hard. And Newt Gingrich, he waited till it was just clear that Newt was a little bit of a threat. That there was at least the off chance he might get out of control, and he just completely efficiently destroyed him. It was so easy. It was so quick. He never seemed flustered. Even while the press was freaking out a little about the possibility of Newt turning this into a super long race or winning, Romney didn't seem to get too panicked, and I think that's just what would happen with Santorum. He just doesn't look too worried, Romney. I just don't think he would get put off his game by him. Santorum's just not that good a politician.
I mean, that's all true, and then also he's good at using the other candidates to get an advantage where he can't get a majority, or if he can't, win every point in a debate, he'll let Bachmann or whoever go after it. And we are recording this before the caucus. She could change her mind, but it really looks like Perry and Bachmann are committed to writing off Iowa as a fluke and putting up a claim in South Carolina. And this exact same thing happened in 2008, where had Thompson collapsed faster, he might have dropped out quicker. Huckabee could have won South Carolina too, despite rushing in with no organization. Instead, you might have just a bunched up field, and Romney, I always thought he'd be the first Republican nominee to not win the South Carolina primary, since that became a must-win proposition. And he still could, or he could win it with 27%. And
he's going to make some kind of effort there. He's not writing it off, Romney, which is interesting.
He's been making he's not writing off like he did 4 years ago. Oh, no, it's really interesting.
Oh, he made a good effort 4 years ago, but since then he's not writing it off, even though it was a disaster. Yeah,
he only cut bait at the end, and I fell for the spin. Just like Rudy didn't actually not compete for New Hampshire. It was that every time he went there, he got less popular. No, it's but yeah, this is the thing. We're just kind of despondent because nothing will really. This is a completely even race, but we all, because the way the primary's built up, we expect this. It's weird. It's hard to think of a system. The Democrats have one. It's hard to design a system for Republicans that would allow a pure outsider to triumph, like somebody who could just do everything right, not get the right endorsements, or only get some of these second-tier endorsements and then win anyway. It does feel like the Republicans have managed to build a primary system that lets the base play its string out while never actually winning. I mean, even when Reagan won in '80, it was after losing once and becoming, closer to the center of the Republican Party that was moving right.
Right, and he had far more credible a resume too than some of the people we've been talking about as these insurgents. Yeah. So even then, there's a big difference between him and, say, Herman Cain or Michelle Bachmann or some of the other people who've had their moment in the sun.
But the last thing I'm curious about, though, is with Ron Paul, you're not going to speak for all of TPM's editorial decisions, but there is a question about how to cover Ron Paul's campaign going forward from here. Mm-hmm. Now, he could win Iowa, in which case the press will say it was a fluke and it didn't matter, but there'll be reports on how, reports on how he did it, and more scrutiny of his, radical ties, for want of a better term. He could come in a second, and I think it'd be different if Romney's in third or Santorum's in third. He could come in third. It'd be disappointing, but he would have just, beaten out 3 serious people, or sorry, 2.5 serious. Well, I'm not going to judge whether Gingrich, et cetera, are that serious, but he, did
But I mean, there's no doubt it
he,
would be a surprising result that especially the GOP establishment would be embarrassed by and have to explain. I mean, that's one of the things about it, I think, about a Ron Paul victory, is that it forces his own party to confront the fact that he has a strong following within the party that they try to pretend doesn't exist for the most part, or they try to pretend isn't what it is, that it's really something that really agrees with them more than it does him. But it's something they have to deal with. And just like, surprise Pat Buchanan victory in previous primaries ends up being an embarrassment that follows them for years, this could be something along those lines, something that they really have to deal with internally just to figure out where their party is.
It could be, but the thing I can't figure out is that there's a way that the primary gets covered, and how much would it be covered if Ron Paul does pretty well and is the last man standing against Mitt Romney and can win some caucuses against him? I mean, will the media be covering Ron Paul like a candidate and having debates between Mitt Romney and Ron Paul, and how many people will show up to his events, things like that? Because I feel like he's more inclined to do that than to leave the party. But the thing is that he has this role in politics that he has basically resurrected from the days of the old right and the fringe right. Mm-hmm. And because of the who's going to win horse race nature of this stuff, it's really barely examined. I mean, his magazine profiles of him will go into it and talk about this stuff, but for whatever reason, like his style of politics is not quite being psychoanalyzed the way that Buchanan's were. Buchanan was understood as this,
There's a smokescreen with Ron Paul, though, which is that he's this odd coalition, which is that there's the old Birch world he came out of, which we're discovering in a big way by re-examining the newsletters, by some of the people we're spotting on the campaign. It's still very much a presence. But he sucks in these other groups that distract. I mean, the face of Ron Paul's campaign, really, is these 20-something libertarians and these college students who probably, a lot of them don't even know about any of this John Birch stuff. They see him totally differently. A lot of low information. I can't tell you how many people on my Facebook feed every day, low information Democrats or left leaning independents, who think that oh wow, there's a Republican who's anti-war and pro legalizing drugs. Awesome, and they don't have any idea about the fringe stuff. So I think that complicates things. Whereas Pat Buchanan, it was really straightforward. This is where this guy was coming from. This is who he represented. There was no college students for Pat Buchanan the same way or some other confusing smokescreen. It was really clear what he represented. Here I think the issue is that people are starting to wake up to the many different facets of Ron Paul's base. That it's more than just this weird youthful phenomenon that sprung up around him.
They're starting to, and I think a lot of it is just that Pat Buchanan in that prime was this really pugnacious, typical politician, or like a eloquent politician, whereas Paul is a nice, rambling old guy who gives the same speech every time. And it's just not... Some of this is just pure image, that he just doesn't seem like a radical candidate. He seems like kind of a fringe candidate that's gotten lucky, but not like somebody who represents any weird strain of American politics. And he does. And I mean, there's this debate that never ends on the internet, whether it's good to have somebody with some of these views in the race. Mm-hmm. I think it's good to have some of it, but there's not really been a reckoning with why this pretty big chunk of America believes this stuff. That's not, what would you call it? That's not just panicky or sensationalist. Like, why, after 3 years of recession, are there so many people who believe that we need to get back to the gold standard and the Fed? I mean, you dance around it, but I wonder if we would... I'd love it if we had that, if he's stuck in the race, because he will. I'm afraid instead we'll have a stupid, okay, this is basically over, let's all talk about Americans elect now. That's what I'm really worried about.
So I am looking forward to... I just can't wait till the day when inevitably Americans elect their members, choose Ron Paul as their nominee, and the Americans elect Council of Elders has to swoop down and, I don't know, put Michael Bloomberg in or something. It should be a lot of fun. But I'm curious. I'm curious if you think, is there any chance Ron Paul would run as a third-party guy? And do you think the way this race is heading would make it more or less likely if he feels like he was on the precipice of getting the nomination but didn't? Do you think that might make him more likely to run or less?
The sense I get is that, I mean, he's retiring from Congress because he realizes that he never expected that his son would be a senator with a lot of national influence. And so he knows that his politics are going to get carried on. And I think he's just a different political operator than he was when he ran as a Libertarian candidate. He really did not expect, I think he honestly did not expect that kind of paleoconservative politics would ever find a huge following again. And now they have, through him running Republican campaigns. So I think he would make the calculation of whether he helps it by running third party. He clearly wouldn't. Two, if he took votes, two, he would hurt Rand Paul, and three, it wouldn't be clear if he would. He doesn't really want either party's candidate to get elected because he really disagrees. I mean, everything that Obama's carried on from Bush, he despises, and everything that Romney has done, he despises. I mean, I think he despises because Romney wants to increase military spending. He's probably more objectionable. But I don't see that he would have he would see an obvious role there. Whereas, if you're considering this, you just got to look at Ralph Nader, who might have played an influential role in the last decade had he not run third party and become somebody that Democrats just refused to work with. And Paul is now somebody. Now let's see, after a year of scrutiny, if people feel like he's been exposed as some guy who traffics with racists or whatever. If he's not. He, in his late 70s, is like an elder statesman of this wing of the Republican Party and of the conservative movement. And I'm almost explaining why I would do it more than his mental process. But no, he blows the. There's a lot of obsession about if you don't say flat out that you won't run third party, you won't. But people lie about that until they don't. Gary Johnson said he wouldn't, then he did. I think Paul would just use that as leverage, let them dodge a bullet, and continue allowing his version of Republican politics to flower. It just makes more sense, and he has a team around him. I mean, the difference is also, in 1988, the people around him were Lou Rockwell and Burt Bloomer and these kind of...
And Gary Johnson.
Well, Gary Johnson a little bit. But in the 80s...
I was just reading some of the old articles from that run, and Gary Johnson was quoted. It's like, oh, yeah, we finally have the best libertarian candidate ever. He was a young guy.
No, he was saying... But the people around him at that time didn't think the Republican Party was salvageable, and then in 1992 they decided it was because of Pat Buchanan. And then in 2000, Buchanan ran as a third-party candidate, and no one remembers that it was a huge disaster, destroyed the Reform Party. But then in 2012, Paul has people around him who've worked for other Republican candidates, who are just more confident you can work in the party and get this stuff done. So I see that as what he would do. I mean, the guy's in his late 70s, and his books are huge bestsellers now. I can see him doing that.
Mm-hmm. I think it is interesting that you mentioned about how influential he can be within the party. It surprises me that given how there's starting to be some more scrutiny about his more fringe views and how antithetical his views are to most of the other candidates in the field, Mitt Romney still goes on TV and says, oh, I'll totally vote for Ron Paul over Obama. No question. Easy choice. Done. A, I don't think he believes that. But B, I think it's interesting that he still feels the need to give this kind of lip service. I wonder if that's not out of some kind of fear he might offend him and send him out of there, running as an independent. But he definitely has an influence that the other candidates seem to have to at least acknowledge.
He does, and I feel like now that he has it, and he had a taste of it in the 70s, he went into obscurity in the 80s. I mean, it's still the one thing that drags him down is the way he politicked with those newsletters between serving in Congress and running as a Libertarian candidate. I feel like he'll stay out of it. But I mean, there's other things to cover in America. But a reckoning of why this strain of this really long dead kind of politics is back would be really interesting to explore. I don't think we will. I think we'll just kind of go immediately to the horse race.
One alternate scenario for that. just to throw out there. Do you think there's any way Gary Johnson just takes his support, not all his support, but some of that movement just goes to his candidacy, his third-party candidacy, and maybe that starts surprising? There's already been some polls showing that he could be maybe a factor as a third-party candidate, even with his low name recognition. I'm curious if you think he has any potential there.
I think so. I think Paul in 2008 endorsed 3 third-party candidates. He endorsed Nader, who's running as independent, Cynthia McKinney, who was Green, and Chuck Baldwin, who's running as the Constitution Party's candidate. And he kind of went out of his way to not endorse Bob Barr because of some disagreements. So I think I think Johnson doesn't blame Paul for the fact that he didn't take off. He blames the media. I think they'll start talking, and I think you could see Paul kind of telling people to take a look at Johnson while not running himself. And I think in a situation like that, he wouldn't have the blowback of being his own third-party candidate. And, I don't really – this playbook story today in Politico, I guess I've heard this before, that anonymous donors are pledging to destroy Rand Paul in 4 years if Ron runs. He's probably not too worried about that, but if you can forestall that, helping out Gary Johnson is a way to do it.
Right, and even if he doesn't formally do it, the idea that maybe his supporters might just go there anyway. I mean, they don't have another Paul campaign to probably look forward to. Do you think there's any chance just the sort of institutions he built might just on their own start to gravitate that way? Or
it's hard to say. I think the thing is Johnson's very popular. I think people were surprised that he wasn't allowed in the debates, and especially because in the second debate he was competent. He answered everything pretty well. He had a zinger. People in like the kind of Cato Coctopus part of the Republican Party are quite fond of him. But I mean, how much of are they going to be willing to support the Republican candidate if it beats Obama? Like, I don't think. Remember, like David Koch's first involvement in politics was as the Libertarian Party vice presidential candidate. I don't think he's going to be interested in helping anything but Mitt Romney win in 2012. So we'll see. But but that's where the energy is going to be. I mean, we ever talk about third party. There's not really centrist energy. Centrists don't really know what they want. There is a lot of energy on the far right, and there's disappointment with Obama on the far left. And I actually think one of the big losses of the year is if Buddy Roemer had been in these debates. I don't know how well he'd be doing, but I can totally imagine him having taken off as a sort of weird isolationist, anti-trade, Occupy Republican candidate. Like right now in Iowa, there's the Occupy the Caucasus group is just kind of floating around, protesting things. We could have been in a wonderfully different reality where Buddy Roemer was getting like this independent crossover vote for the Caucasus based on his Occupy platform, and that's too bad. This obsession with horse race stuff kind of kept us away from it. But I need to. The caucuses are actually coming up, and they'll be over by the time this goes up. But I need to go and cover them, and you probably are. Where are you going to watch the caucuses from?
Here, I might hit a bar. Not sure yet. I'm actually about to head off to Obama's headquarters in New Hampshire to see how things are going over there. So it should be interesting.
Well, I know of the Rick Santorum and Ron Paul parties. If you want to watch those, that was 2008. I watched it from the Ron Paul bar in New Hampshire, and remember, CNN, their graphic of who was winning the caucus only had the top 4 names. I just remember loud boos every time that they showed that, and didn't show that Ron Paul was getting 10%. So this time they'll have a real celebration. He's going
probably not a bad idea. All right. Well, anyway, good talking to you as always. Enjoy the rest of Iowa.
Good luck. I'll see you in New Hampshire in 24 hours.
All right. See ya.